Depending on how seasoned we are, we should be able to spot even visually what good technique is versus bad technique. If we aren't able to spot that, I am going to go ahead and put a side-by-side comparison here of good versus bad technique, and we can go ahead and see the differences. Starting with lining, when it comes to good versus bad technique, if the technique is yielding clean, solid, saturated, consistent results while minimizing trauma, I would say that it is good technique. If the technique is yielding bad results such as inconsistent line weights, scar texture healing, more pain for the client, if we're noticing these adversities throughout our tattooing process, then our technique is probably bad. When it comes to bad lining, for example, I am at 4.5 volts. I need to give my needle enough time to make its rounds in order for it to deposit ink in a solid, clean, and consistent saturated manner. If I'm not doing that, I'm going to get inconsistent results. So this is what bad technique would look like. So you can see that each one of those lines was deposited really quickly. I didn't give my needle any time to work or anything like that, and the results are therefore reflecting my technique. You can see that none of these are saturated, none of them are clean or consistent. The line weight integrity isn't true at all, the angle is off. Everything with this technical application right here is just simply wrong. I am just moving way too fast right here. So you can see that all the results that I am getting are that of faded lines. These look like they've been there for years already, even though they just got deposited. That is what it would look like to move too fast. Moving too slow would be something like this. Kind of just looks frozen. So that's moving way too slow. So the needle is making too many rounds in one spot for it to deposit the ink in a clean, consistent manner while not causing any trauma to the skin. So this right here is just way too slow. We have to find the middle ground between these two techniques from too fast versus too slow. Both of these techniques are inaccurate right here. None of them are correct. You can see that I'm taking all my time just shredding the skin here just because the needle is making too many rounds for one location. So the needle's already made enough rounds. I should have been moving on already. Same thing, the needle's made enough rounds. The needle's made enough rounds. I should have been moving on already, but I'm not. I'm moving too slow. This right here is improper technique. So this is basically the opposite of this right here. If I were to go and wipe away, although we are going to get saturation, the scarring and the pain and the healing that this is going to go through is not what we are looking for. We need this to be normal, clean, and consistent, easy going for the client. And these are two ways to surely not do that. Just way too slow. What proper technique would look like when it comes to lining, it would be aligning my hand speed to my current voltage and keeping my hand at a steady and consistent pace as well as a needle depth. So this is what a proper technique would look like. You can see that I'm staying moving in a fluid motion. All I'm doing is just simply depositing the ink and getting in and out in one clean fluid pass. I'm giving the needle enough time to make its rounds to deposit the ink in an accurate manner that reflects the line weight that I am using. And you can see it's a lot more steady than the lines that I created above. However, I'm still getting that certain level of optimal saturation from these lines here by using this technique. So I let the needle penetrate into the skin. I give it enough time to make its rounds, enough to deposit the ink in a solid, clean, saturated, consistent manner. And then from there, allow me to dab, wipe away so you can see the true results that I'm getting. And you can see that right there is what proper technique looks like. Although you can see they kind of look the same, if we take a closer look, these lines right here look like they have a bit more texture than these, which would be indicative of trauma to the skin in this area because of the improper application. Hopefully after a side-by-side comparison of these techniques, you can see how these are incorrect and how this one is correct. And I hope that you can see that just based on the results that I got, our line should not look like this. This looks like faded already. It has a sort of faded, inconsistent appearance. These lines right here just would be a world of agony to put into a skin, let alone to accept that sort of tattoo done with this technique would be a very, very painful tattoo, and the results are definitely going to vary upon healing. So much like lining, when it comes to packing, we still have to align some fundamentals to accomplish clean, solid, consistent, saturated results. It doesn't matter if we're going to be packing black and or color, the technique would still apply. There still is improper and proper technique when using black and or color, and it also doesn't matter what size needle we are using, we can still have bad or good technique. So this is what bad technique would look like in comparison to good technique. So right now I'm still running at 4.5 volts. Let's say if I didn't align my hand speed to my voltage, then I'm just going to be packing like this and moving way too fast. So we can see through those passes, although I am doing some sort of ink deposit here, the goal would be to get optimal saturation. You can see I'm getting anything but that. The reason being is because my needle is moving way too slow and my hand speed is moving way too fast. So I am not familiar with how the needle is depositing ink, which leads me to use an improper technique which yields these results. So let's say if I keep doing this, let's say if I want this area to be a little bit more darker and I keep using this technique, I'm not giving my needle enough time to do what it needs to do. Therefore, I'm going to accomplish these sort of blotchy, inconsistent results. When we pack, we should be getting optimal saturation. And from this technique alone, you can see that this is not that. It doesn't matter which direction I go in. I am just moving way too fast for the needle to do anything productive for me. And I'm trying to keep at the same needle depth as well. However, none of that is working for me. So if you're noticing that your packing is coming out like this, it's probably because the technique that you were using is incorrect. You can see just how inconsistent these results actually are when I kind of move the skin around. This right here is exactly what we want to stay away for. This right here is a direct side effect from improper technique when it comes to packing black and or color. When it comes to proper technique when packing black and or color, there is, again, a way much like lining to go about technically applying this technique correctly. I'm going to want to be considerate of my hand speed to my voltage. I'm going to pay attention to my needle depth. I'm going to make small circular motions, but not before those small circular motions have enough time to do what they need to do, which is deposit the ink for me. So proper technique with packing will look like this. I'm going to be mindful of my needle tips. I can see that they're working and going into the skin now. I'm going to start creating small circular motions going into one another like this to accomplish optimal saturation. And I'm going to do that from one point to another. I'm running at a very low voltage, and you can see that right here, all of this is completely saturated. And then I would kind of just continue that until I pack the area that needs to be packed. Same thing, doesn't matter if I'm going left to right or right to left. I give my needles enough time to do their thing. And then I'm creating small, consistent circular motions as you see me doing here for optimal saturation. And this right here is what good technique looks like. As you can see, it's nothing like the technique that we just currently use. It is night and day, and so are the results. Let me go ahead and clean this up with a generous amount of ointment so you can see that we are definitely not fibbing here, and we are in fact accomplishing clean, solid, consistent, saturated results using this technique. That right there is a clear sign of good versus bad technique. It doesn't matter how much I do this here. Each time I apply this technique, it's always going to come out very, very close, if not identical, just because this technique is tried and true. This method works for me as the artist. So if I just extend this a little bit to kind of prove that point, let me go ahead and dab away, and you can see no matter where I go or how I do it, I'm still accomplishing saturated results. That is good technique. It's going to be the same rule of thumb for shading, whether we're using a mag of any sort, or for example like this 5-round shader or a 3-round liner. The same rule of thumbs in terms of good versus bad technique is still going to apply to every single technique that we are using when it comes to tattooing. So when it comes to shading, bad tattoo technique would look a little something like this, and this is a great way to yield inconsistent results. So what I'm doing is I'm just placing down pixels where I think I should place them. I don't have any definitive starting or ending points, so you can kind of see that some dots are darker, some are lighter. Don't necessarily have a hard starting or ending point, but you can see that this technique, I'm just kind of wailing on the skin and going anywhere. This isn't necessarily how I would want to approach it. I would want to be a bit more meticulous with my technique, so that way I can yield cleaner, consistent results. But you can see though, with this technique right here, there's just simply no structure. It's kind of just chaos and all over the place. Although some may like the results of this sort of dot appearance that I'm getting, I would like for my dots to be a bit more smoother and cleaner and consistent. I also want them to neighbor each spacing in between one another well. So for me personally, for my personal taste, there are a couple of variables that I need to consider, and if I want to get those variables, then this is a great way to not do that, but just simply kind of not being mindful of my direction or my hand speed to my voltage. And you can kind of see my needle depth is all over the place, which means some dots are going to be darker than others, which is exactly what we don't want when we're shading. We want clean dots to layer up so that way we get smooth shading. So you can see though, using this technique, there's not any sort of definitive shading. We don't have any tones or anything going on, but at the very least, we do have texture. Keep in mind, since we're going for shading, this would not work because the goal would be to accomplish shades from one tone to another, whether it's light to dark or dark to light. This is what bad technique looks like. Let me show you what good technique looks like. Good shading technique would be the polar opposite. What I'm going to do is have a definitive starting and end point. I'm going to be mindful of each spacing in between each pixel, and you're going to notice that my starting points are pretty similar and neighboring to one another, and my whip out motions all end around the same spot. Although they aren't completely identical, when I get them close enough like this, this is where I start yielding those shading transitions, and this is where I start getting smooth, clean, solid, consistent results. So you can see now where I'm touching down right here is the darkest point, and now I can even go back and start cross hatching as you see me doing here, since this is going to be my darkest point, and then keep building up the shading as you see me doing here. So you can see this technique is much more controlled, it's much more accurate, and not only that, the visual results that we get are much more appealing to the eye than the first technique that we were using when trying to accomplish this sort of shading. So you can see I'm just bringing my whip motion out just a little bit more. Let me do a little bit of cross hatching right here. Slow and consistent. So you can see even my cross hatch technique looks more clean and consistent than the one up top. Let me wipe away, and you can see now clearly we are now getting a tone from darker going to lighter, and you can see that this is all reading nice and consistent to one another versus the sparsity between these pixels right here. These pixels seem more evenly spaced than these right here. And this technique would essentially be repeated until you have accomplished and completed the area that you are needing. So you can see if I needed to bring out my whips more, I will go ahead and do so. Like this, and then I would just simply layer up until I've accomplished the layers that I am wanting to accomplish. that right there is the difference between good versus bad shading technique. It'd be the exact same rule of thumb for even dot work. So if I were to apply dot work with a good and bad technique, we're going to be able to see the difference. This is what dot work with bad technique looks like. So let's say if I'm not familiar with my technique and I'm just kind of going really deep in there, I'm just kind of applying dots random like so. So not only am I causing trauma to the skin, I risk causing more pain for the client, giving them a horrible experience. And not only that, the healing results with this sort of technique is definitely going to be inconsistent with textured healing, raises on these dots, just because of how deep I am going because of my inadequate technique. So you can see, although I am getting dot work, a lot of these look deep and a lot of them do look blown out and painful. You can see that there's no structure, so they're kind of just in random spots. And if there's too much of open area, I have to go back in there and fill that in, kind of leaving it more prone to inconsistent, blotchier results. So this right here is what I would consider to be improper technique, just because there's no structure for my needle depth, there's no structure for my dot placement, there's really nothing going on that's keeping me in a clean and consistent workflow. It's kind of just a free-for-all where I'm just placing dots at random, which is what I do not want. If I go to the back here, although we don't see many blowouts, we're getting pretty close to blowout territory. So this is something that I feel is improper of a technique. I want to have some sort of structure when I'm applying dot work. When it comes to dot work and good technique, this is what good technique would look like. So for example, I'm going to start from one point to another. I'm going to just work off the very tip of my needle, and I'm going to use a sort of 5-point method like that. So I have 5 points. I'm going to move on over, and I'm going to apply another 5 points, and I'm going to keep doing this. And I'm going to take my time, making sure each dot is the same needle depth consistency, making sure that each one has the 5 point. You see how there's spaces in between here? I can just simply go back in there now and add a dot, which is going to give me a much cleaner, consistent read than I would have gotten just kind of placing dots at random. So you can use this 5-point method and get cleaner looking dots here and more cohesive read with your dot work. And then that's the first row. And then what I would do is just simply repeat this process all the way. There we go. And then there was just a couple of dots that I put in the middle to kind of fill it out there. I'm going to go ahead and blot away there so we can see the results. We can see that this dot work is a lot more uniform than these right here. And again, if I just keep doing this here, you're going to notice that the dot work really starts taking form. Keep in mind, this is also the first layer right here. So in comparison to this dot work right here, these are completely different technical applications here. And then from here, what I would do is begin layering up over and over the areas that I want to apply dot work. However, this right here is a good difference between a more consistent dot work approach versus something that's a bit more chaotic. They are in fact two different reads. I would consider this to be bad technique, where this would be good technique just because of the reads. This one appears to be more chaotic. Well, this one appears to be more organized. Here are the results from the varying techniques that I just shared with you. Line work, we have packing, we have shading, and then we have dot work. When it comes to line work, we can see that improper application is definitely different from proper application in terms of the final results that we are going to read. Not only is the read different, you can see when we're actually applying these, the actual visual application process that we visually see also looks different. Same thing with all of these other fundamentals. You can see with packing, improper application leads to blotchy, inconsistent results, where proper packing application leads to saturated consistency while minimizing trauma. The exact same rule of thumb applies to shading, whether it's with a 3-round liner, 5-round liner, or a mag of your choice. We are still going to get different results depending on the technique that we are using. I would consider this to be bad technique, where this right here would be good technique. You can also tell, same thing with shading, much like the packing and line work, the visual differences in terms of the technical application also look very different. And it's the same rule of thumb with the dot work. So you can see where there's no structure in the dot work, we have a sort of chaotic read. When we have a sort of structured formula, we get a more consistent, cleaner read. This right here would be improper application for dot work, where this right here would be proper application. Also, you can see upon applying, those are visually different even when we apply them. I wanted to make this video to raise awareness on how important knowing what good technique looks like versus bad technique. I figured when we start knowing what to look for in terms of good and bad technique, we can start changing our technique and pinpointing if we are using a bad technique, so that way we can better our abilities. That'll be it for this video. Should you have any questions at all, I encourage you to drop a comment down below. I will do my absolute best to assist you in the best possible direction. If you found this video helpful, don't forget to give this video a thumbs up, share it with someone that you think could benefit from this video. If you have any questions at all, I encourage you to drop a comment down below. I will do my absolute best to assist you in the best possible direction. Before you go, don't forget to subscribe to my YouTube channel and ring that bell for me, as I will also be bringing more videos like this for you all. With that being said, I appreciate you, your time, and your support. Thank you very much. You have a great day.